been pretty neck deep in an ag tech company that has been working to solve a problem that's pretty prevalent across both agriculture and horticulture. Interestingly enough, it's not a problem that too many people seem too stressed about. So we'll go into that a little bit further shortly, but I suppose that for me is the first lesson around, I guess, what I know about ag tech adoption. Ask yourself, are you solving a real or perceived problem for the producer? For example, let me ask you a question that should stop the producers in the room right in their tracks. Do you actually know how much of your crop protection products actually land on the target? So I want to just think about that for a minute around, so when you're out spraying, how much of the product that comes out of the nozzle actually lands on its intended target, and the plant, the insect, and stays there? Well, the uncomfortable truth is that somewhere between 60 and 90% never hits its intended target. Another way of putting that is that only 10% of the chemistry that you are using is actually hitting the plant surface where it's needed. 90% of it is being wasted. That's not a sensational start to a speech, it's not exaggeration. It's the reality that we've been accepting for so long as just a cost of doing business. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. That's just how farming is, that's how my father did it, that's how my father's father did it. So, is there really anything we can be doing about it? You're right, the inefficiency that we're talking about here is essentially rusted on, it's baked into agriculture and horticulture. Been there for so long, it's almost not seen as a problem anymore. We've normalised waste on a scale that is just basically unthinkable in any other industry. If you were a manufacturer of anything else and said to your potential customers or your investors that 90% of your raw materials would never make it into the finished product, you'd be out of business in a week. Now, I'm going to put it in some terms that, whilst it's sort of downplaying a little bit, if you spend about $100,000 a year on chemistry, and most horticultural and agricultural producers are spending exponentially more than that, but we're essentially saying that $90,000 worth of that is basically drifting off in the wind, or it's settling on the soil, or it's ending up anywhere except where it was designed to be. And that's not just money that you're wasting. That's time filling tanks, it's the fuel running backwards and forwards to water sources for refilling. It's the extra passes through the field because the initial pass didn't get adequate coverage to get control. But it's also the environmental impact that we could avoid. So the gap between what we think is happening and what's actually happening in the field is enormous, and it matters. So if it's a real problem and my ag tech has a solution, what's getting in the way of adoption? The producer needs to believe there is a problem that can be fixed to begin with. That's our biggest challenge as an ag tech. For other ag techs, perhaps it's addressing a well-known problem, but their challenge might be combating existing competitors in the market. You have to help producers to appreciate that there is a solution to the problem and that your solution is better than the competitor. In our case, and we're, I guess, a bit of a rarity, we don't have a competitor per se. Our product doesn't have competition as such, but the competition for us is the accepted inevitability of the industry problem itself. Our competitor is inertia. Our challenge is actually to educate about the problem. The third point for me is that the burden of proof is actually on the innovator, not the producer. It's up to me as a ag tech provider to prove to you, the customer, that I can solve your problem. So at Agrotech, and we've spent a lot of money doing this, we know that we have to prove to every potential customer that our technology works. And we need to do that using real results, real numbers, with real operations. Not theoreticals, not industry averages, hard numbers. We sit down with our growers and say, give us last year's data. Let us review it. We'll ask you what you spent on ag chem. We'll ask you what you applied, how long it took, and we'll run it through our ROI. And our calculator will show you exactly what our system would have delivered you. And we've done this a couple of times now. We've said, give us last year's numbers, we'll enter them in there. You know what your total spend on chemistry was, your fuel bill, your labour bill, you know all of those things. If we can run it through our calculator and deliver a result that's within 5 or 10% of what you actually spent, we know we've got a pretty solid ROI that actually matches your operation. Not somebody else's, not a theoretical, your actual operation. And by doing that, we're removing risk. It's education through proof. And it's the responsibility of the ag tech to do that, not the producer. So, how do we prove our ag tech works to the producer? I've been in this industry long enough to have heard the word snake oil so many times it's not funny. But I get it, I do. As producers, farmers, growers, you're constantly bombarded with the next big thing, the next revolutionary solution, the game changer that's going to fix all of your problems. Australian growers, producers, farmers are all naturally discerning, very sceptical and naturally cautious. And that's a good thing. Because if one of you gets burned by something that doesn't work, the entire district knows about it within a week. Now, that might be at the next field day, at the pub, it might be at the local machinery dealer, but word does travel very, very fast. Don't worry about that, that doesn't matter. So, let me share 4 observations about ag tech adoption that I think are pretty critical. Firstly, does the ag tech actually solve the customer's problem? Or is it a solution looking for a problem? Because there's a difference. There's a difference between technology that addresses a genuine frustration and one that's something that you might already be experiencing versus someone trying to convince you that you have a problem. So for us, the big thing becomes, we really need to be able to prove to you that things are just going to work the way we said they're going to work. So the second one for us is a return on investment. So can your prospective ag tech provider sit down and show you a proper return on investment? But more to the point, can they sit down and explain to you how they calculated it? Because when you're talking about investments of significant funds, you want to know that it makes you money or it saves you money. Not theoretical projections, real results. Third is infrastructure and support. Are you buying a product from the new kid on the block? The fancy bells and whistles, the tried and tested, or is it the tried and tested solution? Oh, we're back again. We're back. Because one of the big things for both horticulture and agriculture is if you've got a problem, it's at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night in the middle of harvest and nobody wants to pick up the phone. Fourth, have you got the runs on the board? Are people using your technology and do they love it? And are they talking to other people about what that technology offers? Adoption takes time. Farmers are generally planning 12 to 18 months in front of where they're spending. There's careful consideration, especially for hardware purchases. A software package might take a little less deliberation, but when we start talking multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars, it takes careful consideration, and that's how it should be. Growers should be taking that time to consider it. This means having a clear evaluation matrix. What criteria will a grower use to judge whether your ag tech works? For our growers, it was pretty simple. We set some mutually acceptable targets and used water-sensitive paper in the paddock to prove it. Our customer said to us, if you achieve the results we've agreed, we'll buy the system. That's removing the risk through education and proof. So I'm going to move to the shameless plug bit really briefly about our technology. So Mangrove Tech, we're not here to try to convince you that you have a problem that you didn't already know about. We're addressing a problem that everybody knows exists but has been accepted as inevitable. That's spray waste. As I said before, our competition is not any other spray technology. Our competition is inertia. It's believing that it is just how it is. So here's what we do in a very brief, and we'll keep the technical out of it. Traditional spraying is a constant compromise between coverage and drift. You want to get coverage, you've got to use smaller droplets. Smaller droplets are prone to drift. You want to reduce drift, you use a bigger droplet, but that compromises coverage. Example to my left. Only about 35% of the droplets that come out of the nozzle that you are using to spray with are within the spray quality that you were aiming for. That basically means that 2/3 fit either side. They're either too small or larger than what you were ultimately chasing. We use permanent rare earth magnets to change the physical properties of that spray profile. We broaden the spectrum of droplets that fall into the sweet spot, the ones you wanted to begin with. We take that from around 35% to about 60%. That means more droplets land on the target, they stay there, more pesticide doing the work the first time, and less waste. No moving parts, no electronics, it's just pure and simple physics. Simple being the operative word. So, I don't want you to just take my word for it. We've got a number of customers here in Australia who work across a range of different crops. They've all ultimately come to us with different pain points, but some of them have been very, very clear about what they're trying to achieve. So the burden of proof looks like in practice is somebody like an industry veteran called Andrew Kennedy. He knew exactly what his pain point was, and he came to us going, I just want you to prove it works. So Andrew's been a spray contractor and a grower for over 40 years. He operates in Mount Gambier, probably one of the windiest places in the world to be a spray contractor. His pain point, limited spray windows, a lot of sensitive crops in his area, but also the constant battle with the wind. He wasn't looking for someone to tell him he had a problem. He knew he had a problem and he knew exactly what it was. His approach was simple. Show me it works, I'll buy the system. Try before you buy. We sat there and came up with mutually acceptable targets. Andrew wanted to see 15% more coverage on the target than what he was doing with his conventional machine, and he'd buy the system. The results? The lower canopy, we saw 50% more coverage than what he was getting with his conventional sprayer. So, what did that mean? He bought the system. But Andrew's also noticed ongoing since that he's seen up to 60% less off-target drift. Now that's something we're working to quantify and prove to you with a number, but anecdotally we've got a number of customers who've said between 50 and 60% less drift using Magrotech. So one of the biggest things for Andrew though was his ability to extend his spray window. He was picking up to a day and a half a week in his spray program. Think about that as a spray contractor. In his business, time's everything. As he says, one of our biggest losses is having to run back to water sources, and most of the time they're not close. So he said, if I can reduce the application rate, maintain the agronomic outcome, the quality and the yield, I regain some time, I put money back in my pocket, but I put money back in my customers' pockets too. He grew a chickpea crop in 2022. Like all of his neighbours did, there was moisture there to justify it. The neighbours applied 3 fungicides right upon harvest. He put on 1. Those cost savings are not just the chemical. It's the time, it's the wear and tear, it's the fuel, it's the labour, it's the whole package. The cost savings, as Andrew said, were just mind-blowing, and this is somebody who's seen every innovation over the last 40 years. Probably the one that's going to ring the most true here to you guys will be a gentleman by the name of Scott Samwell. He's the second case study we're going to talk about. Different operation, different approach to the same adoption challenge though. Scott and his family run Eastbrook Farms. They grow Brussels sprouts in the Adelaide Hills. The biggest kicker for their business is they spray every week of the year. It's a 10-month production cycle to grow Brussels sprouts. His big thing is coverage is king. They have to get the penetration. And as a result, their standard application rate was 1,000 litres a hectare. And at 1,000 litres a hectare using his conventional sprayer, he was still losing 1/3 of his production to disease and pest pressure. He came across our technology in a publication, reached out to us and fitted the system to one of his machines. Now, initially, Scott was very, very cautious. Scott's very much a critical thinker and really evaluates exactly what the system offers him. So he sat back and made no changes for the first 18 months. He ran that system at 1,000 litres a hectare and got that third of production back in store. So all of a sudden we had a producer who was accepting that 30% of his product was going to be damaged, who now had that 30% of product back in his bank account. But that was then the catalyst for, we can do this better. So he turned around and said, in conjunction with our crop science team, show me what I can do. Scott now sprays with 750 litres a hectare. That's a 25% reduction in water rate. But the big bit here is that's been a productivity gain. Scott now gets 25% more done with every tank full. One of the really important parts for him is it's now allowed him to overcome that coverage dilemma and be more effective in conditions that would have required him to park up and stop. We're able to make the most of our spray window using MagroTech, was exactly what Scott said to us, and he called it a game changer a number of times. Now the third one for me, there's a smiling picture of Scott and his Brussels sprout. The third one for me, and probably one of my favourites, is Bharat Barna from Hirabana & Co in New Zealand. And it's because it starts with some pretty healthy skepticism. Bharat calls a spade a spade. When he first heard about our system, his words were, so you put magnetic rods inside my spray line, what the hell is that going to do? Well, the honesty is refreshing. It's exactly the reaction a lot of people have. It's too simple. How can something with no electronics, no moving parts, this basic actually work? But like lots of growers, he was smart enough to test the system. He said, let's try it, let's see what happens. So his team ran a side-by-side comparison. They put water-sensitive paper out, they ran their conventional sprayer and the MagroTech sprayer. So at 260 litres a hectare with MagroTech, he was getting superior coverage to his conventional applications at 360 litres a hectare. So he was getting 23% better coverage throughout the entire canopy of all of his crops, most of that being in the lower canopy, which is where the biggest challenge for disease management exists. His big comment was, I used to spray at 400 litres a hectare, I'm now doing it 260. What used to take me 2 days now takes me a day and a half. I've saved fuel, I've saved spray, I've got less drift, and I've saved water. He said that's got to be good for the environment. And that's a real kicker here. Sustainability and profitability going hand in hand, not because someone told him he should care about the environment, but because doing the right thing environmentally actually saved him time and money. So these three growers, Andrew, Scott and Bharat, all came to MagroTech for different reasons. Different crops, different regions, different challenges, but they all shared something important. They all identified inefficiency in their spray operations and decided to do something about it. They didn't accept that 60 to 90% of waste was just a cost of doing business. They challenged what they'd been told, what they'd always done, and what the industry accepted as normal. And here's what I find really fascinating. None of these guys considered themselves to be early adopters. They weren't just looking for the latest shiny toy. They were practical operators who did their homework. They ran trials, made decisions based on real results. And that's the critical lesson for any ag tech provider in this room. Your growers are going to do their homework. They're going to test you, and they should. Because at the end of the day, the question is whether you're prepared to stand behind your claims with actual data, not just marketing brochures. When we work with a new customer, we're not just selling hardware. We're developing tangible, reportable results that take the stress and uncertainty out of the decision-making process. MagroTech now has 350 units worldwide. Huge uptake in intensive locations like parts of North America and in Europe. In Australia, we're playing a slightly longer game, I will say that. But it's because of our vastness. There's great variation in what we do here in Australia. There's no consistent theme. So different levels of availability of water and different resources, labour, so on and so forth. We've got nearing on 20 units here operating in the country now. Each one's proving their technology in a different region with different crops, different conditions. But it's that ripple effect, it's that onion effect. One grower proves it, The neighbour sees it, takes notice, and we gradually grow the circle. So my challenge for producers today, ask yourself, what's the uncomfortable truth in your operation that you've been accepting as just part of farming? We talked pretty significantly about spray efficiency today, but that applies, and this concept applies to everything in your operation. The willingness to look at accepted inevitabilities and say there has to be a better way. That's what drives real progress, that's what drives real change. Yes, be sceptical, yes, demand proof. Yes, ask for ROI calculations based on your operations, not industry averages, but don't let scepticism become paralysis. Don't let that's how we've always done things be the reason you're still doing it that way in 5 years' time. The truth's pretty simple, but it's probably pretty uncomfortable too. So what's my takeaway for the producer, well, for the ag techs in this room? No, sorry, I'll rephrase that. For the producers in the room. Don't be afraid to demand proof. Set clear evaluation criteria. Ask for trials with mutually acceptable targets. Make the ag tech provider show you how they can benefit your operation. And for the innovators, the ag techs in the room, the burden is on you. You need to prove why growers should adopt your technology with tangible, reportable results, not promises. Show real numbers from real operations. Offer trials and work with potential customers to deliver positive outcomes. Be prepared to put your ROI calculator where your marketing claims are. Take the stress and uncertainty out of the decision-making process. That applies whether you're selling a $1,000 software package or a $300,000 optical spot spray kit. Because if you're willing to question, challenge and change, the opportunity is enormous. We can reduce waste, we can improve outcomes, and we can set ourselves up for a more sustainable and profitable future. But one thing is certain, pretending there isn't a problem won't make it go away. Thank you.